Thank you, Mrs. Main, and a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'd like to begin just with a couple of points about the procedure that we're engaged in here today. And I say this before they leap up with no criticism intended or implied of members of the Petitions Committee. But I have been at a number of these debates now where the public have petitioned us. And I really do wonder whether our procedures are effective and robust enough in terms of delivering on the expectations that those who petition Parliament might have. And I think two things are of note here. One is that we are dealing with two petitions. I'm not sure of this need to lump together petitions from the public just because they cover the same topic, particularly in this instance, as they are of diametrically opposed views. And also one petition, which I presume has been organised by pro-Brexit campaigners, presumably because they feel this Parliament to be made up of Ramoners who are antipathetic to their case. It has taken 5 months for them to gather the requisite threshold of 100,000 signatures to be presented before Parliament, whereas the other, with 1.7 million signatures, was collected in a matter of hours and represents a very serious public outrage to a decision that has been taken by the government. And I think to have parity of consideration of those two things is simply not fair. But the other thing is, and I wonder, Chair, whether those who sign the petitions to this place, how many of them understand that this is the place where their hopes and aspirations come to die. On a wet Monday afternoon in a committee room off the House of Commons chamber with 10 of us assembled with no ability to advocate on behalf of the petitioners, no ability to influence, never mind change government policy. And I do think it's too late for this Parliament, but I do think in the future, if I come back to this place, I'm going to be seeking changes to our procedures and how we deal with those who petition this Parliament, because I don't think we treat them fairly enough. But my concerns about the procedures as to how we deal with petitions are as nothing compared to my concerns about the inadequacy of our Constitution in these current circumstances when it comes to the very sitting of Parliament itself. It is astonishing, is it not, that our Parliament can be suspended for 5 weeks in the middle of a major political crisis whose ramifications are profound and legion, which is in no way near to being concluded. I think most people would find that astounding. I find it astounding myself that this can happen perfectly legally and perfectly normally. The role of Parliament is to scrutinise and hold to account the executive. And it cannot be right that the executive can relieve itself of that scrutiny by the simple expedient of suspending Parliament. This seems to be a bizarre situation, yet this is the one that we are confronted by. And it will mean that the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge, who is our current Prime Minister, by the time we get to October the 14th, he will have been in power, the most powerful executive office in the land, for 82 days, and in only 4 of those days will this Parliament have been able to hold him and his government to his account. And that is, frankly, a shocking state of affairs. And I don't buy the argument, frankly, that this is because the government ministers and their advisers need time to prepare a new legislative programme. I'd be happy to give it.
You just outlined how long the Prime Minister's been in office, 82 days, and that Parliament's only been sitting 4 days. That also means there's only one Prime Minister's questions. So members of this House have not and will not have the ability, until after the Queen's speech, to question the Prime Minister, even though he'll have been in office for well over 3 months by that point.
I know, it's staggering. I think, why is this happening then? We need to ask ourselves that. I think it's happening for one reason, which is that we have a Prime Minister who has no mandate, who has no majority in the House, no ability to get legislation through the Parliament, and therefore, rather than compromise with the Parliament, rather than seek a majority, he is determined instead simply to walk away from it and to not have the debate in the first place. And I think it's a very bad look for our democracy that this is happening in this way. I think it's also bad that we have a Prime Minister who is uncertain in terms of his public pronouncements as to whether or not he will actually deliver on the will of the Parliament, which is now the law of the land, that we should, in the absence of a deal, a withdrawal deal from the European Union, seek an extension to the 31st of January in order to allow further time for a withdrawal agreement to emerge. That the Prime Minister and his advisers are equivocal on that is a matter for deep concern, I believe. And I don't buy also the Prime Minister's suggestion that all we need to do then, in these circumstances, is have a quick cut-and-run election. Because there is no point having an election if the main point of that election, i.e. whether or not to crash out of the European Union without a deal, if that is unable to be altered by the outcome of the election. So to simply have an election as a means to escape the obligation that Parliament has placed upon the Prime Minister seems to me something that we cannot allow, and rightly, the Parliament has not, and the Parliament, I'm sure, will not allow that later on tonight. But I say this, I do think an election will need to come soon, and the delay will only be a matter of weeks. And as soon as we are confident that we are not crashing out of the European Union without a deal and have more time to consider options and strategy, then I think it will be, frankly, impossible to advance this process in the country without going back to the people. It is time for them to have another say, because one of the things I sense is that an awful lot of members of this Parliament, on both sides of the House, understand very well the consequences of Brexit, and they are not attracted to them. But they feel they do not have a mandate to oppose it because of the nature of the manifesto in which they stood on 2017. And therefore, to shake up the political cards and to allow a different Parliament to emerge with fresh mandates may open the possibility for a reconsideration of this. And I do hope that an election will allow a new Parliament to consider putting this matter back to the people who started the process in the first place. Because it is not the role of Parliament to overturn or set aside or ignore the will of the people, but it is the role of Parliament to interpret it. And if in this case we have found 3 years later that what the people have asked us to do is simply undoable, that is to leave the European Union and make things better, it cannot be done. That circle cannot be squared, and we need to go back to the people and explain that that is the case, and ask them if they want to reconsider. Now, it may well be that they do not want to reconsider. It may well be that they are content to leave the European Union knowing that it will impoverish them and their families and diminish the character and culture of this country. But that choice should be for them, and they should be allowed to make it. But I am confident that if we are given the opportunity to fight that election, then we can get an alternative point of view emerged, which will actually look at the benefits of remaining in the European Union and changing it so that it delivers for the people's aspirations. And I say this in conclusion, that when that election comes in Scotland, we shall be campaigning in my party, not just to say, stop and reconsider the process of Brexit, not just to get an alternative government to the one we have had for nearly a decade now, but also to demand and assert the right of the people in Scotland to choose an alternative future should they so wish. And it should be their right not to go down the path that they are led by the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge, but to say that they wish to consider an alternative independent future where they take political control of their own affairs and determine their own relationship with the rest of the people in Britain and in Europe. That is the manifesto that we will be putting before people in the election, which I'm sure will come in November, and I look forward to coming back to argue that case in this chamber.